You're listening to HECM World Weekly, the nation's only weekly podcast bringing reverse mortgage news to you, the mortgage professional. There are reverse mortgage calculators, but then there are reverse mortgage point-of-sale solutions. Lenderful Solutions helps you get more loans, retain more customers, and even make online applications a reality. To learn more, visit lenderfulsolutions.com.
Hello, and welcome to HECM World Weekly, your roundup of the biggest stories shaping the reverse mortgage, housing, equity, and retirement finance world. I'm Gabrielle Hayen. This week, there's plenty of encouraging news for the industry. Senior housing equity has climbed to another record, reinforcing the enormous opportunity that continues to exist for housing equity solutions. We'll also look at exclusive insights from ATTOM on where America's deepest equity is actually being built, why California homeowners are increasingly facing a hidden home equity tax, what rising healthcare costs mean for retirement planning, and why housing affordability has become one of the biggest political issues in America. Let's get started. We'll begin with news that is at the core of our industry. After 2 consecutive quarterly declines, senior housing wealth is once again moving higher. According to the latest NRMLA and Riskspan Reverse Mortgage Market Index, homeowners aged 62 and older now hold a record $14.92 trillion in housing wealth. The increase was driven by more than $314 billion in higher home values during the first quarter of 2026, while mortgage debt among older homeowners increased by just over $10 billion. In other words, housing wealth continues to grow much faster than debt. Riskspan saying easing mortgage rates, which have fallen to their lowest levels since 2022, helped support home values while improving affordability. NRMLA President Steve Irwin summed it up well, saying, "The rebound in senior housing wealth is encouraging news for older homeowners and underscores the important role home equity continues to play in retirement security." He added that record equity levels are giving many older Americans greater flexibility to deal with rising living expenses, healthcare costs, and other retirement needs. For reverse mortgage professionals, that's really the key takeaway. Despite the housing market becoming more balanced, America's senior homeowners continue to sit on extraordinary levels of accumulated wealth. That remains one of the industry's strongest long-term fundamentals and reinforces why housing equity will continue playing such an important role in retirement planning. That story also ties in nicely with one of HECM World's most viewed content this week, our exclusive interview with ATTOM Director of Data Science, Aaron Wagner. Aaron challenged one of the biggest assumptions people make about housing equity. He said the deepest equity in America right now is in the Midwest, with 22 of the 30 most equity-rich counties in the country in that region, including 11 of them in Michigan. Now, that might surprise some people who naturally think of California or Florida when they think about housing wealth. But Aaron explained that this isn't primarily an appreciation story. Instead, these markets have quietly built enormous equity through decades of stable homeownership, affordable purchase prices, and steadily declining mortgage balances. He also gave us an interesting look behind ATTOM's data operation. Today, the company analyzes more than 160 million residential properties, using more than 90 different data sets, bringing together public records, mortgage information, valuation models, and artificial intelligence to estimate property values and outstanding loan balances. Perhaps his most important advice for reverse mortgage professionals was to stop relying solely on national housing statistics. Equity levels can vary dramatically between neighboring counties and even zip codes. The professionals who truly understand their local markets will often spot opportunities long before they show up in national reports. It's another reminder that today's housing market isn't collapsing, it's normalizing, and understanding local data has never been more valuable. One downside of decades of rising home values is that more homeowners are now finding themselves caught by outdated tax rules. New research from property analytics company Fidelity found that 1 in 4 California homeowners now records more than $500,000 in gains when selling their primary residence. That means many are now exceeding the federal capital gains tax exclusion. Archana Pradhan, principal economist at Fidelity, says California homeowners are particularly exposed because of rapid appreciation, long ownership periods, limited housing supply, and tax thresholds that simply haven't kept pace with today's market. The National Association of Realtors says this issue is becoming much broader than California. Its chief advocacy officer, Shannon McGann, says the so-called home equity tax has become an increasing barrier to housing mobility. For our industry, it's another example of how accumulated housing wealth creates both opportunity and complexity. Many older homeowners may increasingly look for ways to access equity without selling the family home and triggering unnecessary tax consequences. One of the biggest corporate stories for the industry this week came from Nexa Lending. The company announced that all litigation between CEO Mike Cortes and former business partner Matt Grella has now been resolved. The settlement concludes every lawsuit between the parties and establishes Cortes as the company's sole owner. Cortes said, "This has been a long process, and I'm grateful to finally have it behind me." He added that his focus now returns fully to the company's loan officers, employees, and future growth. Despite the lengthy legal dispute, Nexa says it continued expanding throughout the period, growing from approximately 2,300 loan officers to nearly 3,700 nationwide. With ownership now settled, the company says it can move forward under unified leadership. Another encouraging industry story this week comes from Tennessee, where we're already seeing the impact of expanded access to proprietary reverse mortgages. OneTrust Home Loans' Gabe Bodner told HECM World that Tennessee loan officer Matt Helton recently closed what Lonebridge Financial has confirmed was its first proprietary reverse mortgage funded in the state, and reportedly only the third funded since the legislation took effect. The result speaks for itself. Instead of waiting 12 months to qualify for a HECM refinance and receiving around $20,000 in proceeds, the borrower was able to move forward immediately with a proprietary reverse mortgage and access more than $100,000 after paying off the existing loan. It's a strong example of how expanding product choice can translate into better outcomes for consumers. Healthcare remains one of the biggest financial challenges facing retirees. Fidelity Investments has released its latest estimate showing that a typical 65-year-old retiring in 2026 should now expect to spend around $185,500 on healthcare throughout their retirement. That's a 7.5% increase in just 1 year. Fidelity says the increase reflects rising healthcare prices, greater utilization, and the growing costs associated with chronic health conditions. Shams Talib, head of Fidelity Workplace Consulting, says retirement planning today is about much more than simply reaching a savings target. Healthcare, he says, consistently remains one of the retirees' largest expenses. Interestingly, Fidelity has also found retirement confidence continues to improve, with nearly 3/4 of Americans believing they'll retire on their own terms. For reverse mortgage professionals, this story reinforces why housing equity continues to feature so prominently in retirement planning conversations. As healthcare and living costs continue rising, more retirees will naturally begin looking to the wealth they've accumulated in their homes. Housing affordability has become much more than an economic issue. It's now a political one. According to CNBC's latest All-American Economic Survey, housing costs are now the #1 concern among Americans aged between 18 and 34. It ranks ahead of food prices and even protecting democracy. The findings highlight just how central housing has become to America's broader economic conversation. Affordability, supply, and homeownership are increasingly influencing public policy, retirement planning, and long-term housing reform. For our industry, it's worth watching closely because these conversations will inevitably shape future housing policy and public awareness around home equity. The World Economic Forum also published an interesting article this week arguing that solving today's housing affordability crisis requires much more than simply building additional homes. Instead, cities should focus on reducing households' overall cost of living by improving transportation, healthcare, education, employment opportunities, and community infrastructure alongside housing. Habitat for Humanity International CEO Jonathan Reckford summed it up well when he said, "Housing affects health. It affects education. It affects livelihoods, economic development, and ultimately human dignity." It's a perspective that aligns closely with many of the conversations taking place across the housing equity industry. Housing isn't simply an asset. It's deeply connected to retirement security, financial well-being, and long-term wealth creation. Finally, this week, one opinion piece generated plenty of discussion. Bloomberg argued that stocks, rather than housing, may now represent the better long-term investment. The opinion article points to 3 decades of exceptional stock market performance alongside soaring home prices and higher mortgage rates that have made homeownership increasingly difficult for younger generations. Whether you agree or disagree, it does reflect a genuine shift, especially in how younger Americans increasingly think about building wealth. But for reverse mortgage professionals, there's an important distinction. Our clients aren't deciding whether to buy their first home. They already own homes, often after decades of building equity. Their question is different. It's, how do I make the wealth I've already accumulated work harder throughout retirement? And that's exactly where housing equity solutions continue to play such an important role. Those are this week's biggest stories from across the housing equity, reverse mortgage, and retirement industries. If there's one theme connecting everything we've covered today, it's this. America's senior homeowners continue to hold extraordinary levels of housing wealth, but the conversations around that wealth are evolving. Healthcare costs are rising. Housing affordability is dominating public debate. Tax policy is creating new challenges, and better property data is helping professionals identify opportunities with far greater precision than ever before. For reverse mortgage professionals, understanding those broader conversations will become just as important as understanding the housing market itself. Thanks for joining us for another edition of HECM World Weekly. If you found today's update valuable, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit HECMWorld.com for daily news, expert insights, and exclusive interviews from across the housing equity industry. I'm Gabrielle Hayen. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.